rating. And the third model, which was a hybrid model that provided students with instruction on or off days, that had a 3.09 rating. And then the fourth one, which was, full e-learning, received, I think, the lowest of the four. It was a 1.86 star rating. So it seems like, the AM PM and then the on and the off days are the most popular, based on obviously the circumstances that we're living in. I don't think anybody would opt for any of these models. We all would love to be back full time. But given the circumstances, Model 3 was the highest. The other piece that was included in that survey was the information about the likelihood of you sending your children back. And that's obviously a very fluid question. I'm a parent myself, and I know that just because I think something in July doesn't mean I'll necessarily think it in August, as the situation, with COVID evolves. But the numbers today are that 79% are likely to return. 16% are undecided about their return, and 5% were unlikely to return. So I thought that was good information for us, because I know that one of the things that we've talked about is managing a changing student population in terms of total numbers could be very difficult for us depending upon the plan that we adopt. So what we're going to do as we work to develop a plan is build in some type of either safeguard or notification period, so that if folks, for some reason, in mass, turn it up. That wasn't my radio. I don't know who it was. If some folks choose to keep their kids home but then change their mind, it gives us some time to make some adjustments on our end if we have to, based on the model that we've adopted. This morning and last night, I received a number of emails from the Southern Westchester Principals Association. Most districts that I'm connected with are looking at either the AM and PM or the on and off day models. The only district that I'm aware of that's looking to get everybody in the building is Byram. And I haven't actually spoken with that principal. I think Mary connected with the superintendent. And what she explained to us is that model works for them in terms of distancing based on their total enrollment. Their enrollment has been down the last few years. As a result, they have more space than they need.
That's Chappaqua, Byram?
That's Armonk.
Armonk, okay, thanks.
Yeah. On the other hand, Mamaroneck High School is actually looking at a 3-day split. They're looking at an A group, a B group, and a C group. And Mamaroneck is doing that because they have the opposite problem that Byram has. They are bursting at the seams, and they do not have enough room in their building to even accommodate 50% of their population and maintain the guidelines or suggestions around social distancing. So I think each district really is going to be approaching this in a unique way. I'm kind of curious today to hear from the group some ideas, some suggestions, maybe some questions that they have. If we were to go with an AM PM model or an on day or off day model. We just met as a cabinet, myself, Mary Fox Alter, Don Mara, and Peggy Galati. And the next conversation that we have as we explore the possibility of AM PM, and I think all the building principals that I spoke with at the high school level are doing this today, is speaking with their facilities people to find out what the turnaround would look like to get a building ready. Is it 30 minutes? Is it 60 minutes? Is it 90 minutes? Is it 2 hours? And I asked that question because I was really impressed with Edgemont's plan for reopening. But then I went and looked at the time that the principal allocated to clean the building, and I became as excited as I was, I became equally, if not more, nervous because he only slated 30 minutes for a complete cleaning. And I don't see how you can turn around all of those classrooms and all of those workspaces, in such a short period of time. What I did today is I drilled down and I went into the cleaning documents that are referenced in the Department of Health documents that were sent out yesterday. And the cleaning documents for any high frequency touch spaces, it requires cleaning and disinfecting by trained personnel. So, could we ask members of the staff to do it? I think we probably could if we trained them. Could we ask children to do it? Based on the way I read it, we cannot. So, those are interesting challenges kind of as we look at these two models. So I'd like to open up the floor and hear, ideas or comments, suggestions that folks have about some of these different models.
Joe, based upon our school numbers, like you said, Armonk is going to do a full day based upon their numbers, Mamaroneck and ABC. What are the possibilities that we have with our school numbers?
So if we use 6 feet as a guideline, what I did about 2 weeks ago is I emptied a couple of our classrooms and I went in and I did measurements to see what that would look like in terms of the total number of desks per room. Mm-hmm. Our math and science rooms by far are the largest instructional spaces that we have in the building. And in science, that's a little bit misleading because there's very awkward furniture for labs in the science rooms. So you can't just put, a large number of desks in there, although you can utilize some of that lab furniture. In English and social studies, our rooms are on the small side. The square footage in those spaces ranges anywhere between 550 square feet to 680 square feet. For the typical 600 square foot room, we could fit anywhere between 9 and 10 desks in those rooms if they're spaced out at 6 feet. For the larger spaces in math and in science, we could typically fit anywhere between 10 and 13 desks, in those rooms. As a quick point of reference, in most of our classes, when we develop our master schedule, our goal is to typically have anywhere between 18 and 22 students, in each one of our rooms. Now, Mr. Baffuto runs some very large sections because we always have, folks who opt into, like, let's say AP psychology during the summer months because they want to challenge themselves and it's an elective. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is as we begin to develop a plan for room assignments this year, I'm going to be looking at the square footage and the number of students assigned to a class as opposed to the wing of a building that a room is in and where someone has traditionally worked. Like Mrs. Nalbandian, for example, she teaches some of the highest level math courses that we have, which are not the largest enrolled courses that we have. And she simultaneously has one of the largest rooms in the building. So we will probably be using that space for Mr. Baffuto's AP Psych class, or other classes that may happen to have a large enrollment. And it's not only classrooms. I walked around the building. We looked at computer labs. We looked at the library. We looked at the cafeteria. We looked at the gymnasium. We are looking at any area in the building that we might be able to use. And we're starting to look at some areas outside of the building that we might be able to use during the fall months and perhaps in the spring to create flexibility as far as space goes.
Oh, I have two questions about, well, one about that, one about something different. So if we do use optional spaces, and I'm thinking like, the auditorium or the gym are like, maybe I'm thinking more of the auditorium. I'm just thinking of like opening doors and windows. Like, is there airflow like in those places that we're not just like in a confined space? You know what I mean? With like no
there is an air exchange system in the auditorium. The gymnasium I'll have to look at, and that'll be part of my walkthrough with Steve Chamberlain when we make some of those final decisions about those spaces that we're going to use.
That's kind of like that. Sorry, that's kind of like the thing I'm seeing is like making sure that airflow, is happening into places.
Well, and pre-COVID, there are requirements around air exchange. There are not requirements around air conditioning. Unfortunately, which is why some of our rooms can be kind of stifling in the late fall.
Like my room?
and in the early and during the spring months. But I do know in the gymnasium, the more I think about it, there is an air exchange unit there. And the reason I remember that is because we were recently talking about air conditioning options. And although we couldn't do air conditioning in there, we did at one point talk about retrofitting the coils that are on the air exchange unit to perhaps produce some cooler air so that the air that was exchanged becomes cooler. And when I talk about air exchange, I'm referring to air outside of the building versus air inside of the building. So those spaces, Ricky, do have those units.
Okay, cool. My second question, and this is not on that topic, so I don't know if you care if I change topics or not.
Go ahead.
But with can you just elaborate a little bit more in terms of like scheduling, if it was like an AM, PM or a Monday, Tuesday kind of thing? Like when the kids aren't in school, but we're teaching the opposite group, like when the kids at home, are they just doing independent, like synchron, whatever that word is, independent work? Or we also expect it to be like e-learning to them while the other group is in school kind of thing? Can you just elaborate on that?
Well, that's what we're working to develop. It's a plan.
Okay.
So I'm kind of curious to hear, what folks think, about that question in particular. When we were just having the conversation among the school, the district leaders, we talked about if it was an on-day, off-day program, perhaps if you were, working as a teacher in the district, you'd be planning 2 lessons that you'd be teaching in person, and then 2 lessons that could be posted, to your website, and then with an opportunity for office hours on those days. But that would be something that, we would want to work, with all stakeholders to develop the best possible plan so that there is a component of this that happens, online, and there's a component of it that happens in person. And I think that in person is really the game changer. It's what we didn't have this past spring. And I feel like the students' ability to work with teachers, during the week in person, in addition to work that they might be doing online, is going to improve, everyone's, work, the students' work, the teachers' work. Because I know that that's something I heard from a lot of teachers, during the spring months, is I just wish I could connect with so-and-so. I don't see them as often. I feel like getting kids in the building is going to be a great asset.
Yeah.
Emily?
Yeah. Hi. So, talking with somebody I know who's actually teaching in Hawaii, they're doing an every other day, but Friday is planning day. So the kids are in school, Monday, Wednesday, or Tuesday, Thursday, and then the Friday is planning day, catch-up day, meeting day, which I thought sounded kind of good because we're right now in a 6-day week. It just ends up kind of really being crazy. And listening to I forget who it was. She was in the main meeting. I don't know what committee she's in now, but the teacher from the Bronx, I think she's teaching it. She was talking about her days being forever long. So I liked the sound, if it was possible, of having the Friday for a day that the teachers, maybe you're still in the building, but it's just the teachers and, they're meeting together and, because this is going to be really hard to be constantly recreating.
So I think the one thing we have to think about before we start talking about like calendar days and stuff is what would those groups consist of? Because we have multivariable classes. So not all of our courses are taught for one grade level. So like English 9, yeah, it's easy to say English 9 can come in on A and B day, say. But when you say math classes, every math class is divided across the board. So it would be very difficult. So we have to, I think, identify what groups of students we think could come in. And I'm coming from more of a reserved, conservative approach. My concern about coming in full throttle with, like dividing it into 2 or even 3 groups would be that we would still have very, very large numbers of students in the building. What will we do with passing time in the halls? How are we going to get individual classrooms cleaned in between the movement of classes? Because there's, unlike a middle school or elementary school where kids can stay in that room, our students, everyone in that room is going to have a different schedule. So we have to really think about who do we want to let in our building first, and how will we gradually increase enrollment in our school to the point where we can then maybe manage a fuller cohort of students. I don't think we should start by saying every student will have an opportunity to start even 1 day a week of regular instruction, because of the vast numbers of students that will be in each course. And that's what concerns me, because there are classes like an AP calculus, yeah, that might only have 11 kids in it. But if you took English 9 as a course, right, or you took global history as a course, and then you think of the other courses those students would be in, you're talking about huge numbers of kids in the building, and we still only have the same number of faculty. So I think that's really where we should think from a very conservative approach in terms of who are we going to have in our building first. Let's see how the movement in the building works, how we're able to accommodate the cleansing in between transfers from class to class, and then gradually increase our enrollment maybe by a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks into the school year, where we're seeing the COVID numbers maybe stabilize, decrease, or increase. That's because I think if you come from an approach where you can remain consistent and not have a lot of changes with the students, you have a better chance of success than coming in, trying to get everybody that opportunity to come into the building, even though I know it's ideal, and believe me, I would love that. But we have a higher risk of it not being successful with the more people we bring into that building, and then having to pull back, go back on home full instruction, and come up with a reentry plan. That's just my thoughts right now.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Joyce. I mean, do we put the electives online and put the core courses in the building and focus on that, and leave, like, let's say my AP Psych class is an elective, we put that online, and that like in my case, it would pull out 47 to 50 kids out of the building. I mean, do we do something like that?
Well, that works for that one type of course, but if you think about it, students only have maybe 1 or 2 electives in their program, with the exception of upper
We'll
class.
still be here.
So there's still a lot of numbers. I was actually thinking, and I know this is very, very conservative, but I'm thinking of your special needs students coming in first. Let's get the students who have high needs into the building, who really need to be here every day with their teachers, and see how the movement about with those students in the building is. Start maybe the first 2 weeks with students on the e-learning, but make our e-learning platform much more structured. Students should be following a schedule, as opposed to having more of that, you can come on when you want, or you don't have to open up your video screen and stuff. If we can improve the way we do our e-learning and provide students and families with more structure, the e-learning platform can be successful as a gradual loop back into a full day program. And then just keep, like I said, start with your smaller groups of people first, your neediest people who need to be in the building, who need more of that hands-on instruction. And then gradually increase, maybe then you start to add in some of your freshman courses, because those are the students who are new to the building, who would need more structure and more support. And then maybe integrate, your maybe either by cohort of grade or by cohort of type of course. Maybe your science courses need to be in, because that requires a lab. And how are we going to manipulate the labs while we have a lot of cleaning? I think that's where my thought is coming from, because my concern about all one for all is going to be very hard, even though I know it's what we all want.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
I think Joyce brings up a great point about the more structured e-learning, if that's, you know, a route that inevitably probably will have to be taken. I think that's a whole other conversation, but I think Joyce is completely correct that we just need more structure with the e-learning and the expectations and signing on. And, you know, at this point, except for the senior class, every single student has been provided a district issued laptop, right? Because we're in that third year of that. So besides the seniors, you know, I think there's the probability that we can have a more structured thing because most kids have.
Yeah, and our plan is to take any of the remaining laptops that we have in the building that are on carts and distribute those to the members of the senior class. So we will be giving students in grades 9 through 12, you know, that type of technology for the fall.
Hello, everybody. I know you can't see me because I'm newly back at work in the city and my camera faces the wrong direction. I apologize for but I have been listening to you, and I certainly agree with Joyce and Ricky. I have a child now going into high school next year, but I can say for my daughter in Bedford Road School and my son in the middle school, which probably a little more akin to high school, the e-learning was very, very lacking in both respects. Not for the fault of anyone, no one had it together, but kids really need one platform and they need it interactive. They have to be there like we are today, although I'm setting a bad example by you not seeing me. But they really need to be on a Zoom where they can see everyone's faces, where they can have an opportunity to raise their hand. They can't really, even in high school, watch a taped lecture, or they can't watch a teacher live where they're not really interacting with their class. The next best thing to being there, and nothing replaces in-person learning, but is to do this, what we're doing. And that really has to be made available on one platform in an easy way for classes when they're not in the building. I can tell you, I work in city government. It is very likely that we will start school and then have to, unfortunately, I hate to be the harbinger of doom, but it is very likely you will be transitioning at some point to full e-learning. And that has to be much different in Pleasantville than it was this past year. I can't speak for the high school, but I do have friends who are teachers in other districts. I had a friend who's a teacher in a middle school in another district in Westchester, and she got on and did her class full day on Zoom. She would do math and then tell them you have a 20-minute break and you're all getting back on afterwards. Clearly that doesn't work for high school, but those children truly benefited by being in school all day because she was able to do that in her setup for her school. I realize there's a lot going on here, but I liked what Mr. Bafuto said, maybe doing some of the students at home where you have large classes. And what about the idea of cohorts, keeping groups of students together in one classroom where teachers move? I realize that doesn't work in science lab or math lab, but in many of the core classes, keeping the students there so you don't have to clean the room every 40 minutes. That's just not tenable. And having maybe the teachers rotate in core classes. For the students you have in the building, you could keep for several periods students in one class. I realize it's a logistical nightmare, but it may be a better option than the cleaning and the moving. Just saying.
Yeah, the challenging part at the high schools, we're just not teamed in the same way. So like I'm thinking, do we almost come up with, like, if we were to do something like that, because I think it's a great idea, you know, do we come up with a team for the, you know, or pods in the humanities and then pods, you know, for math and science, because there are sometimes alignment there, you know, where kids are in similar courses in those areas. So you know, that's certainly something that we could look at. There hasn't been a lot of conversation about, you know, those pods from the high school principals that I've been working with, but I'm meeting with them later this week. So I'm kind of curious to ask that question and to see if they've gone down a similar path, you know, when they've thought about creating groups that they might keep together during the day. That would certainly help in a number of different ways.
I think what might be important too is when we consider how we're dividing up the students across 3 buildings for childcare for little ones or kids in the middle school. You know, I know at one point we had talked about dividing up kids by name. It'll be hard for logistical for parents, you know, with kids in middle school and elementary school and high school, if one kid's in on Monday, Wednesday, and another kid's in on Tuesday, Thursday. And that's going to be very difficult, as Joe just said, with sciences and some of our multi-level classes, as Joyce pointed out, are very hard to cordon them off. I was thinking more of like kind of like a zone approach to some type of teaching, using some of the bigger spaces. And if there are 3, science classes, getting the kids in the auditorium for, let's say, a science lecture, then followed up by keeping the kids there, then get social studies in there. So where you're having, bigger cohorts, and then you use an optional breakout for some smaller office hours on maybe another day. So kind of like the opposite, looking for some of the bigger spaces, maybe even combining, if I teach 2 sections of honors chemistry, getting all those kids in. And I know, as Joe pointed out, that some of my kids overlap with math. A lot of them overlap with math. Then have the math teacher come in right behind me and maybe do math and science on, as Emily said, on the Monday, Wednesday, and then maybe do the humanities on the Tuesday, Thursday. But I loved Emily's idea of the Friday for planning. I think it's critical. I think that's going to be a big piece that's going to help us be successful, is that planning day.
Maybe even with that Friday planning piece, is that time for like, maybe the smaller social emotional or the small conversations about, racism and just those small conversations that we always want to be able to have, but we don't normally, like that advisory type situation.
Yeah, I would love to do an advisory model on that day. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah, like something like that, just to provide that platform for those smaller conversations.
And what would the
Love to
kids
have.
be doing on a Friday?
Working from home, projects, tests, homework, reading, they have a lot of work to do. So
I
they
have
could
a
easily
couple
be.
of thoughts on that actually, because when I think of instruction and when I think of how do I plan instruction for my students, I always think backwards. So I really want to figure out what is the end goal, and I don't know that New York State's going to give us any specific info about this very quickly, but when we think about the instruction and the amount of time that we need in certain classes, especially, English is a skills-based class. It's not a content-based class, but the other 3 major content areas are all content and skills-based. So you need enough time to be able to cover all of your history or all of your math or your science to be able to be like successful on those Regents exams or AP classes. So I guess what is, as I look to plan and figure out how am I going to the needs of my kids if they only meet 25 minutes a day, if we do an AM PM versus a 42 minutes a day, if we're just doing Tuesday, Thursday, is do we have Regents exams? Because if we don't, then we can provide instruction that is hopefully more tailored to the kids' needs right now, because going full blast on all of this as if there's an expectation of a June Regents exam is a lot to expect of teachers and kids. So it's kind of like a question that I don't think we have an answer on yet, but it's just something that I'm thinking about. And then the other thought I'm thinking about is I know other schools that are getting sooner, like Arizona, Florida, they're kind of using a lot of space that they have. And certainly we can't put little kids in big desks or big kids in little desks, but like utilizing middle school and high school spaces easily switched. So whether or not we're using space for, like, let's say like middle school was off one day and the high school is using the space in the middle school, and that way we can get more kids in, but utilizing less, square footage pretty much. I don't know if that's even like a real thing, but it's just thinking about how do we use the space that we have based on how big the kids are. We can't put little ones in really big desks, but just thinking about how we can kind of use space if we do need to kind of get everyone back in one day. You can have like the high school on a Monday and the middle school off, and like e-learning on a Monday, or like kind of switching it. So I don't know, just some ideas.
So does it make sense at all to do something like, well, I agree with a lot of things people have said so far, especially the structured Zoom for classes online.
Mm-hmm.
And the structured Zoom for classes online, the students have to be required to sign in at a certain time. It has to be a requirement. If you're, if you're not there, you're marked absent, and whatever the system was before for a kid cutting class, they're cutting. If they're not on the Zoom, they're cutting class.
Or if they
So
shut the
that helps the parents too, get the kid to sit down and do it. Because, it helps everyone, I think. That's one thing. Does it make sense? And I don't know if it does with your schedule, to divide, like Monday, Wednesday is freshmen and sophomores, and Tuesday, Thursday is juniors and seniors in the building? To do it by grade level in the building, and then have the online stuff the opposite day? And then the teachers that teach those classes are available to do the Zooms because those are the 5 classes they're teaching. Keeping it, for the teachers, keeping it the same as it's always been. These are the classes you teach. You're not teaching more, you're not teaching less. You're not prepping more, you're not prepping less. Just some of them are going to be in person and some of them are going to be online.
Science classes are mixed, across like sophomore, junior, senior, freshman, junior. They're, because we schedule according to the individual student. And so that would be very difficult.
Yeah, and math and world language are definitely mixed as well, so it's hard to do it that way. My other thought too is when you think about it, you're talking about somewhere between 140 and 150 students per grade level. So you still have 300 students in the building. And it's the movement from class to class that gives me the big, hiccup, because when you read those guidelines, I don't know. I can't imagine single file when they exit classes and having arrows up the hallway where kids are going to walk one way and down the other, and getting them back and forth to class within 3 minutes. They're not supposed to use lockers. It says that, they also don't want them carrying their books. So when I think of that many people in a building with the amount of social distancing, it's not just social distancing in the classroom.
You can, it says masks if you can't social distance. So I would say masks should be required in the hallways.
Masks are required regardless. I think
they're not in the guidelines. They're not required while you're sitting at your desk if you're social distance. You can get in, sit down, and take it off.
Because I
put it on to go out.
But even still, I think you're still going to find it very difficult to socially distance within those spaces of travel, and I don't
agree.
know. I think that like to try to take, say for example, a physics course that has 30 students in it, you're going to have to divide that into 3 different days.
Not necessarily.
No, 2 days, 15 and 15.
Yeah. Well, I would have to put them in different spaces.
I know, but how would they be taught by that same teacher? That's what I'm having
on alternating days. And I actually would be able to do something like, I'm just thinking like, if we split Alpha, because we tried to, accommodate the parents who are asking us, K-12 to please make sure that there's consistency with families, for a number of reasons, I may have to, talk to someone like Tom, who has 17 in a class, and put him in a space that he's not accustomed to teaching in, because that's the space that I can use for that number of kids. Whereas someone who's accustomed to teaching in their own room, but they only have 16 kids in their class, and they happen to have 10 in that particular section based on the way we divided the group, they might teach somewhere, different. So that's something we have to look at as we devise a plan to split up the groups. Most of the high school principals,
not by grade level.
Most of the high school principals that I've spoke with are using the Alpha model, because they're getting the same feedback from families, whether it's a sibling in the middle school and the high school, or in the middle school and the elementary school, that they want their children, to be on the same schedule, so that when families figure out, childcare and all the other types of things, they can make that work for them.
But
I throw out a crazy.
Go ahead, Rick.
I throw out a crazy idea that I don't even know it's going to make sense until I say it out loud, because I'm just like listening and
go for it.
Right now. What if, this is going to sound crazy. I know this, guys. It's going to sound crazy. What if like during the school day, there was 2 schedules that released kids at different times, so that what Joyce was talking about with the changeover of the school and the classrooms and it sounds crazy as I'm saying it out loud, but what if there was 2 schedules within the day, so that the kids, not everyone gets released at 9 o'clock after period 1. only certain classes get released at 9 o'clock, and then another class gets released at 9:15. So like they'll follow the same. You only have one schedule, but there's two schedules within the day. I don't know if that's
staggered movements is really what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
You just have to have a classroom ready for them to go into. And so that's
Right. I'm sure this is a logistical nightmare. As I said,
I mean,
it's
I
crazy.
think the idea of it does make sense. We can't have all the kids in the hallway at the same time. I think we also need to look
Yes,
at
we could.
developmentally. These are teenagers, and I think like all the committees kind of blend together because this hits on wellness as well. Like we have to make sure that our kids are going back safely and with academic rigor and making sure that they are feeling good as well. And this is going to be a tremendous change, not just for the adults, but the kids. I think when they think of going back to school, we don't even know what that looks like. And from like a kid perspective, I think in their head, they're like, I can't wait to get back and see my friends. But they can't go and like punch each other in the arm in the hallway. Like they can't do that. They can't hug each other. And so it's very difficult for them to kind of figure out, how do I balance that? And is going back the same as how I thought it was going to be? And then how do I also deal with these academic issues? And the one thing for e-learning that I always really have in my head is making sure that we have equity. And there are some students who signing on at a particular time, I love the idea. I think it's perfect. I would love to have that kind of like expectation. But there are children who don't have the ability to be able to access their computer every day at a certain time. There are some kids who are going to have they're going to have a hard time being able to get themselves up. These are still kids. And I know that a lot of my kids were, the sleep schedules are really off. So it's hard to penalize a kid when both parents are working and they're 14 and they slept through their stuff and they just totally missed it. It's hard as a teacher to say, well, I'm sorry, but you kind of, you have to fail that assignment or something. So there has to be some flexibility built in there because there are going to be some major like circumstances that are going to be hard for some kids to be able to get on and have that expectation. But I do think there has to be some expectation. And from what I'm hearing across the US, we are not going to make everyone happy. There are going to be some people, some adults and some kids who are not going to have the greatest advantage in this. And there are going to be some who are going to get those things. So like we're trying to sometimes like put everything like a round peg in a round hole. And it's sometimes kind of like a little bit of like a square peg in a round hole. And where you have to figure out who is not going to have the greatest advantage, but what risk is that to the child or the adult? Because it's not going to work out perfectly for everyone, but we do have to make sure that we're putting in those risks. And
I also think over evaluating or afraid of the halls. We put teachers in the halls and we get the kids to separate. I mean, anytime you go shopping, for example, you go to ShopRite, I'm like, they're pushing me. You can't go down this aisle. Stop. Go back. If you want to get online, you have to go to aisle 4. But we're afraid to say that to the kids. No.
Right.
We go out in the halls and we tell the kids, separate. Right. Everybody.
I had to pull my daughter in today. She left her house without her mask. I said, "Where is your mask?"
And we
groaned and groaned about it. But
keep in mind, schools have all their kids in the building. When you're in a store, they're only letting so many people in at a time.
Well, so are we. We're not letting the whole school in.
Yeah,
well, I'm just saying, if say, for example, you're already in the building, right? Now say you have 150 kids, let's just say 150 kids in the building, they're already in the building. Now you have to be able to navigate those students, whereas with a store, they're letting 10 in, 10 out, 10 in, 10 out, and they have more control over there. But the other thing, Stacy, just to your point about kids that are struggling, we have a lot of data that we've collected from March till June. We really know who those kids are that had the trouble with that access. And those are the kids that I would consider your your high needs kids. Those should be kids that we bring in right away. I wouldn't get them started on e-learning. Like when I say high needs, I'm not just talking about kids who have IEPs. I'm saying kids who have maybe no access to computers, kids who have family that's not available, kids who have had emotional challenges while we've been out. We have room in our building where we could create smaller learning centers where you would have teachers who are in the building or teachers aides who could participate in those students e-learning to help facilitate their experience, and they're not left to their own devices where they were at home. So we can kind of troubleshoot some of those issues in the beginning before we start to, return to a full learning experience. If that was, a way we wanted to go about it.
I think Dylan has his hand up.
Okay,
Oh,
Dylan,
yeah.
you go.
No, I just had a couple macro things. One, are we planning as a committee for this to be a semester long or year long? Because I think that drives a couple things. Because honestly, we could do without midterms for a year and gain about 7 instructional days by not having that midterm week, because there's always review before it and the 5 days to implement it. We tried to implement an assessment schedule last year. Are we going to, in terms of instruction, you have what is going to be going on in the building, what is going on out of the building, and how is it being assessed? So if you have that kind of instructional cycle in mind, are we going to maintain an assessment cycle or schedule to keep things organized? If you do have the hybrid model, you almost have to group teach. And what I mean by that is pool all the Global 9 teachers and collectively produce an in-person lesson and an online lesson so that instruction does not cease to exist, which means it may be easier for a year to suspend honors classes in certain content areas because then you get more teachers to pool to create the lessons. Another big thing I have is, and I don't know if the state's going to come down with this, is do snow days exist? Because if we go to an online schedule, then that changes the school calendar forever.
Yeah.
And we can show that we're continuing learning, that changes the mindset as well. So I know it's something that's far down the line, but in terms of instruction, it's coming down the line. What constitutes ceasing instruction for a day?
Yeah, it's very good points.
Yep.
I just want to go back to something that Stacy was saying also, it's in a way, it's like, what is the priority? The high school with you have so many different kids doing so many different things. I'm just seeing Paula's name there. She's got 2 kids in the same grade who I'm sure are taking none of the same classes.
Right.
What is the priority? Is it to satisfy the elementary school parent who's got kids in the high school, or is it to educate our high school students? Because I don't know, all of us looking at the screen, I think when we were in high school, we were a little bit more independent. And as a high school student, can we enforce that a little bit to say to the parent, you know what, marrying up all your children's schedule, that's maybe the 4th thing on the priority, because we got to make sure we got the classes done right. Of course, if we can get the kids, but we can't satisfy everybody. And I would think that I would want my kid to have the classes that he needs in his 11th grade year or 10th grade year or whatever, more importantly than making sure he's in school on the same day as Sister Susie, who's in 6th grade. I don't know. And then of course that mother's going to be annoyed, but it's like, which is more important, the classes or that they're on school the same day? And is high school, are we really responsible for childcare for high school? Can we look at some of our community buildings like the library or the rec center, where some of these children on their off days can be in a church or rec center? If we're not going to be hiring all the teacher aides, for example, because of the lower student level, can some of our community people come in? If their kids are not in school on Tuesday, just pretend, is the school legally responsible? And if not, can community members help in having a place for these kids to go? As I say, like a church, those churches have a lot of spaces, the rec center has spaces, the library, so that it's another place where these kids can be instead of in an empty house if the parents are at work.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Emily. I was wondering also about like required amount of credits too. We've always had like school policy about the number of credits a student should take. Perhaps maybe for the first semester, we can loosen that constraint a little bit so that students are taking, as you said, Emily, what they need, and then it cuts back on the volume of students in some courses. And piggybacking on Tom's statement about electives. Maybe electives can be taught remotely where your core classes, most particularly when I think of like a science course that needs the hands-on lab instruction, or a math class that might need a little bit more of a teacher's demonstration up front, you could have more availability for those classes for students to come in.
I think the backup, we need to even have like a really good backup plan, because if, I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, if I read this wrong, but I believe Governor Cuomo said if you have to stay below 5% over a 2-week period of cases, of positive cases, if we go above that, I believe you have to sustain that 5% or lower for 14 days. Mm-hmm. So if something happens and there's, no, am I wrong about that?
I think it's an average, whatever the 14-day average is.
I think if you go above 9%.
On the next day, it's a new 14. Every day, it's a new 14-day average.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Unless you get like a really big jump, it should come up and down in a kind of a,
Okay, because I'm assuming if there is a surge at some point, which they're saying it just likely is, just based on how the virus is,
right,
that we may have to kind of like pull back from all of the in school and kind of use e-learning. So I think having like a really good e-learning plan as a really good backup, because unfortunately it's probably a really good reality that it's going to be our plan B, C, and D. It's a really good e-learning plan, and on top of it, how to get back into the building, knowing that we are probably going to have to like kind of like roller coaster it for a while at least.
I think we need to develop almost like how we've had this phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. I think we need to have a plan with multi-phases attached to it, just so we could shift on a fly if we have to we're shifting to phase 4, we're shifting to phase 1. So whatever plan that looks like for us, I think it needs to be multifaceted just to accommodate anything that may happen around us.
Donna?
I have a couple of things going on in my head listening to all of your wonderful ideas and suggestions. I'm a mom of a senior going to Sleepy Hollow High School. I'm a Pecanico mom. And my daughter is a sophomore with an IEP. And I think the need, and from hearing from a lot of other parents on a lot of other calls, is consistency and routine is something that my high honor student who's a senior needs, as well as my daughter with an IEP, because both of them fell apart towards the end of the year. Both of them, they didn't want to do it anymore. It was hard. It was, they weren't getting up. They were going to bed late. I'm not ratting on my kids, but it is what it is. So I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. And Joe, I've mentioned this to you before. Sleepy has a block schedule where longer class periods, but you meet every other day. If we're thinking about doing that type of a model, a hybrid model, is there any way that we can incorporate that? And also at the same time, incorporate the kids who are at home, they can zoom in on the lesson that they are missing. Because if we can Zoom, why can't each classroom Zoom? Why can't there be a laptop facing the teacher and the kids Zooming at home? You split the class in half the kids, and I don't know how to do that, half the kids are home, half the kids are in school. And then that way on your off day, you have your routine. You still have to get up. You still have to have your camera on. That is your attendance. If you don't, you're marked absent. And, it would be hard in the beginning, and to someone's point, being fair and adjusting to a new normal, like a 3 strikes, you're out kind of a thing. You shut your Zoom camera off. But the kids have to be accountable for this, and they have to have routine. And I think a combination of both, you know, might work if we can Zoom every lesson, if that's possible.
Donna, I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense because Stacy, I totally feel what you're saying, that this is hard for kids. We don't want kids disenfranchised. Kids have different needs, abilities, levels to deal with this. I mean, it's hard for all of us and we're adults, but I do strongly agree with Donna that the kids crave the structure. Even when they fight us on it, even when they fight parents on it, they crave the structure of school. It is an institution to them. And if they have a routine that they are responsible for meeting, mostly they're going to rise to that. And yes, there will be kids with problems. There are kids that show up late for school. There are kids that, you know, have an issue and don't make it to class. And that is dealt with, and it can be dealt with in the same way. But if they're given that responsibility, certainly by the age of high school, of showing up on time for a Zoom class, yes, some of them will be late. And you'll deal with it like you would deal with if they keep being late to class. There are some kids that have a good reason for being late and some kids who, you know, just need maybe a little firmer discipline. And you will deal with it and you will know your kids. But I do believe they really, really need that structure. I get, Emily, what you're saying about a Friday as a planning day. As a parent, I would ask that maybe it's a half-day planning day, because I can tell you, I have two kids that mostly rise to the occasion where the bar is set, but if the bar isn't there, it's a 3-day party weekend. My son would not spend Friday going through a list of assignments and working extra hard on his projects. You know, maybe it could be, you know, half a day or some kind of instruction on Friday, but not a full day. Obviously, there's a need for the teachers to meet and plan that needs to be taken into account. But the more it can be made normal for them in their minds with a structure, whether they go to class and this class meets for longer, or again, as Donna said, split it up, half Zoom, half live. If they're interacting in person or on a computer, they're going to get a lot more out of it. They get a lot more out of being with you guys, with their teachers, than they do on their own. They really just don't do well on their own.
And then that'll solve the issue, Joe. You know, God forbid we have to shut the school down because COVID numbers are rising. Well, bam, we have the system already set in place. We're Zooming already, you know, so, you know, the teachers can be home Zooming, and then everybody, you know, I don't know if Zoom has the capability. I'm sure it does. But
Well,
then
I know that there are surrounding districts that have begun to outfit their classrooms with those types of cameras to provide that instruction. The last, you know, I heard in terms of, you know, our looking into that, Dr. Fadjo was, you know, looking to see what they did at, I believe it was Horace Greeley, and I connected him with someone over at Pace University who's doing something similar over there.
I just have something to add. Sorry. Yes, so even though it seems good to have the structure and to have the students, one group of students, one cohort there on Monday while the others are Zooming at the same time on Monday for the structure, it's just not the same when you're in the classroom and when you're home looking. Even here, we only have 17 participants. Really hard for each of us to even be involved. The kids who are on Zoom are really just going to check out. It's the ones in class who participate. Each course is different. Like I go back to like what Ms. Tedros said, you know, like if you have an English class, I much rather would see when they're not in class doing something that, you know, doing a research project or doing something that they could really delve into, because I think it's really easy to sort of kind of check out when you're in the Zoom class, especially when you're going to have half the class is in front of the teacher, the other half are on Zoom. It's really difficult.
I think as a teacher, that might also just be hard as like an instructional level, like paying attention to the 10 kids that are in the room, but then also paying attention to the screen and the 10s. I just as, you know, as that teacher, making sure the kids is over there and over there, that's a lot of things to look at all at once.
You can't do both. You definitely can't do both. Sorry to interrupt, but I teach in the Bronx. I was on my screen. I don't know if Emily, if I'm the person you're talking about for the other call,
no,
that was another teacher from the Bronx, but yeah. I was on Google Meets from 8:40 to 4:30 every single day. It was really exhausting, but It was the only way that we could reach our students. And for all the reasons, I think, Stacy, that you pointed out, that students are struggling and missing classes. Like if a student missed a class, we were just going after them to try to have any kind of connection. I also work with struggling students, English language learners, and SLIFE students, students with interrupted or limited formal education. So very different needs than I think most of the Pleasantville High School students. But I will say, even our very high achieving students struggled with e-learning for an extended period of time. And I just wanted to point out how important advisory was for our school. And I really hope that it's not, if it does get adopted by the high school, that it's not just a once a week meeting time. I really believe, Kathy was saying that the kids are just craving structure. I think they're really craving teacher contact and teacher conversation. At least my kids are. I have 3 in the middle school. 1 is coming to all of you in the fall. But I would recommend advisory every day, just like a short check-in in the morning to give that structure. The day is starting, whether it's online or in person, and just build that teacher-student relationship so you can have those really in-depth conversations. Or Joyce, you were pointing out that there were a lot of struggling students. You can identify issues early on before they get blown up and you realize this kid hasn't come to class for weeks on end or hasn't turned an assignment in for weeks on end. We just, at my school, we thought it was invaluable. And the kids really appreciated having that teacher contact as well, knowing that there was one person that they could go to if they were really struggling, or teachers knew that they could go to an advisor to talk about another student. So I recommend daily check-ins with kids in small groups.
I have to say our guidance did a wonderful job of holding weekly meetings, discussing the students. And, you know, we were meeting 2, 3 times, 4 times a week as a group, a big group in smaller breakout sessions. So I agree that is super important. And that was very helpful. And you recognize patterns of, gee, they're not just struggling with me, we're struggling. And then Joyce's crew would, you know, reach out and do a more in-depth and bring in, you know, Jackie Russo as needed. And, you know, so I agree, really strong point. The other point I wanted to make was about Zooming every lesson. I agree, that's almost not practical. Especially I know how I teach. I'm walking around, if I'm in the classroom with kids, I'm walking around, we're doing problems, I'm walking around to see what they're doing. How would the camera follow me? What would they see on my screen? If I'm simulcasting notes, I would have to switch multiple screens back and forth. If we're doing something on the board, would the kids see that? I don't think that would be an efficient use of the kids who aren't in school to just be kind of remoting in to see. They wouldn't have the same experience. It wouldn't be as in-depth for them. I'd rather see them working concretely on something at home and then next time come in where we give them their full attention.
Or as a teacher, I'd rather be engaged with those students 100% online.
Absolutely.
So reading what they're saying in the chat, you know, seeing what they are, you know, looking at them on the screen. Like you really, I don't think you can do both. I don't think you can be physically present and virtually present for.
Correct. I agree with you.
Well, I think if we talk about what we had said in the beginning about like a slow group of people starting in the building first, and the majority of students maybe for even just 2 weeks starting in an e-learning platform, we could really solidify our e-learning platform. We wouldn't have to worry about a huge spike in cases because we would have a smaller cohort of students in the building, and then, you know, gradually increase, maybe like, you know, by the 3rd week adding in, you know, another group of students, and then the 4th week, another group, and monitoring how we're doing with those issues, like taking temperatures as they enter the building, or what we're able to do in between class changing periods, and how we're able to iron out all of those initial issues that we probably aren't even thinking of right now that are going to happen, so that by the time we do get a more robust group of students in the building, we're better adept at what we need to do as a faculty and as students, you know, training them in smaller pods, if you will, of what is expected when they walk through the hall, or how they can, you know, carry their books throughout the day, or maybe Monday, Wednesday, and Friday will be humanities days, and Tuesday, Thursday, and the Friday, the following Monday rather would be like a science and math day. You know, I think we have to look at it. The ideal, we all would agree, the ideal is to have every kid back in school and every teacher teaching their students, but I don't think we can really be reasonable to expect that for September. So I think to hope for the best case scenario so that we don't find ourselves falling backwards is to try to slowly get back into the building full force and do it in a way that's really thoughtful and consistent, because structure is important. I think if a student knows whether they're on the computer or they're in the classroom and they're expected to be there, it gives them that consistency. Whereas if they're in and out on a different day and different schedules, I think that can make for a very confusing. I mean, sometimes I have kids saying, oh, I didn't know it was gym today, so it could be difficult for students to know what day they're in the building, what day they're out of the building, I don't know.
But if you do a slow beginning, like you're saying, and the teachers are teaching that are in the school, then what are the kids at home going to be doing? If the teachers are teaching,
it would be a mixture.
Let me finish. If the teachers are teaching and there's no e-school because, there's no zooming in on the classroom, where is the structure and the routine for the kids who are at home? And they're not starting off, I'm sorry, on a good note. They want to go back to school too. And now you're telling them that you have to wait 2 or 3 weeks to go back to see if the systems work?
No, what I'm saying is every student would be on e-learning. However, some students would be e-learning at home, where other students would be e-learning in the building with academic support. So there are some faculty members that aren't academic content area teachers. They could be support staff teachers, or they could be teachers that are, special educators that work in a collaborative environment with their teachers. So some teachers could be in the building supporting students, where most teachers would be remotely teaching, and that remote teaching could take place in their home or in the school, depending on, where they also wanted to be. And that would be, like I said, like a slow integration, so that now maybe you're starting out with 100 students in the building the first 2 weeks. And then the next week, maybe it would be, 200 students. And then the following week, maybe 300 students. And you're doing it on a gradual basis so that you're not immersing your entire student body on an every other day schedule, where the risk of infection and the possibility of COVID cases increasing is going to be higher, because now you have more people making content. If you have, 600 coming in, whether it's every day or every other day, there's still the risk for exposure is the same for every student, because they're in front of those teachers and they're in the building. And so the germs are still being passed by through the same people. So it doesn't matter whether they're in or out on the same day. So that's why I'm saying I think a slow process of integrating students in would help us to see what is working, how we can be the best effective and consistent with our students, and reduce the risk of a massive outbreak.
And we haven't selected a model yet. So what I'm going to do, what I'd like to do in the next day or so is start a shared document. Actually, we have access to the document that was embedded that had our meeting and our Zoom information on it today. So I'm thinking on the next page, what I'm going to do this evening after I finish with my other meetings is I'm going to start to create some different models, and then we can kind of chime in and play with them, make some adjustments. I'd like to schedule another meeting. We'll do the next one later in the day. We'll do it either for the end of this week or early next week. And at that point, that secondary document from the Department of Education should be released. So I'll have that too. And then I think Joyce brings up an interesting, thing in terms of like the transition back. That's not something that, I've thought about, and I haven't heard the other principals in the area that I've worked with mention that. So when I have my meeting with the Southern Westchester Principals Association, I'm very interested to kind of pose that question, to them and get some thoughts about, what other schools are doing in the area. And when we meet next, I'd like to look at a few models that I'll have outlines of on that document, and we can make some adjustments. And then maybe for the third time that we get together, we convene with that larger group and share a few models. Does that sound like something that everyone's comfortable with?
Yeah.
Hey, Joe, when will we find out how long it would take, if we looked at the AM PM, about how long it would take to clean? Like,
So we met as a district cabinet today at 2:00. I actually left the meeting early to participate in this meeting. Mary is going to be meeting with Steve Chamberlain either this afternoon or tomorrow morning to get that information. That's the million-dollar question. How long will it take us to turn the buildings over? Do we stagger start so we could use the custodians in one building and another building to do that even quicker? Mary posed a question to the principals. She said, well, tell me, she said, how many rooms will you need to clean? And I said, that's probably not the best question because we don't know what the size of the group that we're going to bring in is at the moment. I said, it would be more helpful for us if Steve could say, how many rooms could he turn over in an hour?
Mhm.
Right. So if he were to say, listen, the number's 20, 30, 40, I mean, whatever it is, that gives us good information that we could then use to back into a number that we might schedule for one of those AM or PM sessions.
But it's also the cost of turning those around. For him to turn over 3 buildings for an AM, PM, we're going to have to bring in a lot of cleaners because we don't have the number of sanitizing machines. So he has one sanitizing machine. It takes 10 minutes to clean a room. It takes 30 minutes by hand.
Right. Which might be the biggest obstacle that we have to an AM, PM plan. The machine that Emily's referring to, we have a few of them on order. They've been on order since March.
Yeah.
But as you can imagine, with a lot of the PPE equipment, ordering it is one thing. Having it arrive is a whole nother issue. So what I'd like to do is I have the meeting today, like I said I was going to do, it's been recorded. I'll share it out with that larger group. I've taken some notes. I'm going to work in that document that I just spoke with you about to create some models, that we could share together. Dylan, you raised a couple interesting questions, around just our plan for instruction and assessment, which we'll get to as soon as we develop a plan to get back. I think it's definitely a good thing to talk about, midterms, quarterly grades. Would we consider heterogeneous grouping, for our core classes? That's something I've got to kind of process and think about, a little bit. And then as far as, the exam schedule for grades, and I think it's certainly, we did that this year in an effort to keep things organized. You used that word organized, Dylan, which I thought was, great because it's exactly why we did that. So I think those are some finer details, that we can, work together and plan for once we have a better idea about the model, that we're looking at. And then somebody else raised a good question. I think it might have been Dylan about, what's the duration of the plan? I don't know, right? So somebody started out the meeting, and I swear it wasn't me, saying, Joe, we might end up going full remote at some point. There's a good chance that could be one of the outcomes. There's a good chance that could not be an outcome and that maybe we get to come back, in a full-time basis with everybody in the building. Unfortunately, I found in this work, I am very accustomed to having a routine, to being able to plan long-term. I can tell you what's going to be happening on September 5th, on June 26th, on all these dates during the school year. But unfortunately, in the times that we live in, I can't make those same long-term plans. So I think it's important, given the fact that we can't do that the lines of communication remain open, that we pull in as many people as we can to be part of a planning process, and that we maintain the ability to be agile throughout this whole exercise. So if we notice something has changed, we can pivot. Someone talked about different phases. I think that's a good idea too. Should we have some different tiers, that we have in mind, where we might do things differently if we get called back and we go to remote. So I think any plan that we develop for instruction and the schedule should also include some very specific guidelines around what remote learning should look like if that's the road that we end up having to go down sometime in October or November. I think this is work that we can continue to do throughout the school year, and I'm convinced that with our combined efforts, we can develop excellent plans for the students at Pleasantville High School.
Joe, what is the date on the calendar that the school's supposed to start?
Currently, I don't have the calendar right in front of me.
I think it's September 8th, the day after Labor Day. Would it be
Right after,
Tuesday?
yes, right after Labor Day, yeah.
So that's
So
the-
one of the ideas that's been thrown out there, Donna,
Yeah.
is that local area superintendents are considering maybe front loading some of the superintendent's conference days at the beginning of the calendar year to do some of that planning and preparation, and to, make sure that the programs that we launch that are very unique to the fall 2020 school year are ready to go. I know for us, for example, we received the licenses for a new online learning platform, Schoology, the week before schools closed. And this was work that we had planned for a long period of time. It was training that we were going to do in the spring in person when we were here. So we weren't able to do it before this unexpected transition to e-learning. So we did that training with the staff during April and May. I'd like to do some more when we start to launch for the new school year. I'd like to include a student and a parent training or guardian training, around that time as well, so that families are familiar with it, so that students are familiar with the tool. I think folks are going to find it far more effective. There won't be as many clicks and passwords and all that stuff that really frustrated some folks with Microsoft this year. So, I want to make sure that as we roll out this new online learning platform, we provide all members of our school community with the training and the resources that they need, to use it well. That's an important.
Would you also consider, Joe, and I was just thinking of this, once a plan is devised, having a mock school day where maybe you would call on your seniors, some of your seniors to come in, like maybe 50 of your seniors to come in, and some teachers, and have a mock school day.
Dress rehearsal. I love it.
Dress rehearsal.
See if everything works.
And run through the procedure, the entry procedures, the down the hallways,
Well, somebody mentioned it earlier.
Parents, I would come in and do it,
Yeah, well, somebody mentioned something earlier that, each year, and if you're a staff member, you can recite these bloodborne pathogens videos, the sexual harassment in the workplace videos. There's certain training each year that we have to provide the staff with.
Mm-hmm.
And, it just becomes something that they're familiar with doing, every August and September. I think as we open up the school and all of our routines have changed so dramatically, we're going to have a training like that for our students around what it's going to look like in the building. Because if I were 15 or 16, I'm going to revert back to what I remember, and I'm going to do all those same things. And that's just not something that we can allow to take place in this health crisis. So I think there's going to be some training, that I look to coordinate. We'll use large spaces. We're not going to put kids in confined areas with poor ventilation. And then we'll do that same thing with the staff before they get there, so that in advisory, in their small groups, they can have conversations with kids about, what it looks like in the building, what they can expect, handle some of the disappointment students might have. When we come back, let's say we can't begin our athletic season, or we can't begin our forensics team, our debate team, they're traveling, students are going to be disappointed again, right? So how do we help them familiarize themselves with this new landscape, deal with some of the emotional hurdles that they're going to face? The fact that they can't go punch their buddy in the arm might be something that they're kind of upset about. Like, that might be a little more upsetting for them than not seeing them at all, like having to maintain that distance. So I think there's a lot of good work that we can do to help kids prepare for this new reality.
Or maybe having, an open house, on one day it's a sophomore or freshman open house, and you stagger it. A through C comes in from 9 to 11, and you give them that tour of the school and what it's going to look like for them. you know, so they can walk it, and you can have your seniors, your, walk.
One-way staircases or one-way hallways or signs.
Yeah, have them
They're very different.
have them see it and experience it before whatever their first day of school is.
Yep.
You know, I get concerned about all the research and work that has been done on security. Now they want us to have the desks, all the research on different ways that the classroom should be structured. Now that's all gone, and all the desks have to be facing forward. Now they want to have multiple entry points so that you don't have everybody going in one door. Okay, so now we got a problem with security that we just like finally figured out. And now they don't want doors closed so that you don't have touching the doors. So now you've got like all this stuff that we've just
It also raises questions. How do you do a lockdown drill? You know, like and I mean, these are important drills that we do, and the kids really need to follow.
Sure.
So especially BRS kids, can be kind of scary for them.
That's right. It's right.
Lots of opportunities for new learning. We'll make it work. We will make it work. I promise you that.
Good job, Joe.
And we'll do a great job with it. And I can't wait to see the kids back and to, as quickly as we can get back into the groove of things here in the building in a safe way, and then hopefully make progress over time. If anything, I think this whole experience has really taught me a lot about, being, mindful and appreciative of the things that you have that you kind of consider just to be like everyday occurrences. I think the way that we used to live and the things that we used to be able to do with people are pretty special, and I think it was easy to not recognize that. That won't be the case in the future, though, at least for a period of time. I think, people will really relish, all the things that we can do in a safer place. So I want to thank everyone for coming today. I've got a second meeting in about 5 minutes. I'm going to get a drink. I'm going to use the restroom, and I will see you all soon. Look for an email from me tomorrow morning. Okay.
Thanks,
and I'm available if you have any questions. Have a great day.
Yeah.
Now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.